Hey folks, Joe Gilder with HomeStudioCorner.com here, and I get a lot of questions about microphones, so I thought I would dedicate a video to kind of do an overview, introduction to microphones. They're fairly simple. Everybody knows what a microphone is and what it does, but I do get a lot of questions about the different types of microphones and why you would use one versus another. If you could only buy one microphone, which one should you get, and things like that. So I thought it'd be fairly fitting to talk about that in a little more detail today. So what's the deal with microphones? Well, early on with Home Studio Corner, I wrote an article, a series of articles called 12 Home Studio Necessities, and the fourth article in that series deals with microphones. And we'll pull that up here. And as you can see, my very first microphone is this one right here. Back when I first recorded an album, this was the little Diction microphone that came with the computer that I was using. So I would plug that into the little 1/8" jack on the back of the computer and go to town recording. And I've come a long way since then. But regardless, it's the same technology basically in all the different microphones that I've used. But obviously that's very primitive, didn't sound good at all, and we've moved along quite a bit. So the first thing to talk about microphones is, for the most part, when you look at a microphone, and we're going to use Sweetwater's website as kind of a reference. They've got some good things here. First thing is it's going to have an XLR connection. So regardless, there are microphones out there that have a 1/4" jack like a guitar, and those are typically really cheap microphones that are used for like karaoke and things like that. So if you've got a microphone like that, that's fine, but I would encourage you to upgrade to one that at least has XLR connectors. And all XLR is these little connectors with the three pins. So this will be the end that goes into the microphone. This will be the end that goes into the preamp or whatever. This is actually what the output of the microphone will look like. It'll have these 3 male pins. So if you've got a 1/4" microphone, it's not as usable because anything you're going to use as far as studio quality equipment is going to have an XLR mic input. So it's worth your while to go ahead and get something that has XLR inputs. Okay, so what are the 3 basic types of microphones? There are more than 3, but for recording purposes, we're going to stick to the 3 main ones. The first is a dynamic microphone. The second is a condenser microphone, and the third, and probably the least common or the least used, I guess, would be a ribbon microphone. So there's dynamic, condenser, and ribbon. Now, in all, these all do the exact same thing. They take a sound and they amplify it so you can record it or run it through a PA system or something like that. So let's take a look at dynamic microphones first. Here's probably the quintessential dynamic mic, and it's the Shure SM58. So all a dynamic mic is, if you were to take this microphone here, and you've probably done this at some point, and you were to screw off the top, the little the grill here with the foam mesh on the inside, then you'd see there's not much to it. It's got a couple of wires, and there's this round magnet in there. And all that's happening is, as let's say you're using it to speak into. As you speak into it, the vibrations that you're putting out with your voice vibrate that magnet just ever so slightly. And or there's a coil there. And the coil, as it moves, it creates electricity because it's moving next to the magnet. So these little small movements that your voice creates get translated into electricity, which is then transferred down the cable, and basically that's how you get your audio. That's the audio signal. So the reason dynamic mics are so popular, especially in live sound, is because there's not much to break. It's a coil and a magnet, and it's all mounted, and there's just really no moving parts, and it's very durable. So you'll hear story after story about an SM57 or 58 that you can use it to hammer nails and then go sing into it at a show. It's very durable, and that's one of the big things. Also, dynamic mics have an interesting sound. They don't have as much of an output. It's a lower level output because there's no electricity here. It's just a magnet and a coil, but it does provide a certain sound, and it tends to not have as much high end in some of them, but it also doesn't tend to be super detailed and super aggressive like some other mics can be. Actually, the mic I'm speaking into right now is a dynamic microphone, so it's used a lot in voiceover situations and obviously live sound and things like that. So that's a dynamic mic. A Shure 58, 57. I'm using an AKG D5, the RE20, the SM7B. All of these are examples of dynamic microphones. Now, the next type of microphone, which is probably the most popular in a studio, is the condenser. Now, there are two types of condensers. There's a large diaphragm condenser and a small diaphragm or pencil condenser. And first, let me just talk about what a condenser is. If we look at this picture here, this is the Rode NT2000. You can sort of see right here on the mic, there's this coin-shaped disc. And that's the diaphragm. And they can be large like this, or if we look at the Rode NT5, the little smaller microphone, it's a lot smaller, but it's the same concept. What happens is you run what's called phantom power to this microphone. So you plug the microphone into the preamp or the mixer, whatever you're using, and you turn on phantom power. And phantom power is 48 volts that it sends down the line, and that powers the microphone. And rather than the dynamic microphone, which is completely unpowered, it just uses the actual physical movement of the coil against the magnet to produce a small level of electricity, the condenser microphone actually charges a plate. So you've actually, this little disc here, there's basically two discs. So there's one right up next to the other, and they're very close, like closer than like a millimeter away. And what happens is one of the discs becomes charged with electricity, and that creates a magnetic field. So when you sing into this microphone or speak into it, it vibrates that disc, and because it's charged via the phantom power that you've sent to it, those vibrations then get picked up by the charged plate. So obviously, I'm not a technical guy. I'm not an electrician, so I can't give you all the fancy terms for it. But that's basically what happens. And because it's charged and has a current going through it, it's much more sensitive. So it has a hotter output than a dynamic microphone, and it tends to be more sensitive, meaning it can pick up more detail and usually has a better frequency range from lows and highs because it is picking up more information. What you'll find on a lot of condenser microphones is they'll have options for changing the polar pattern. And that basically is the directional pattern that it picks up. A dynamic microphone is usually directional, meaning it either cardioid, meaning it picks up in one direction, or supercardioid, where it's a little bit tighter pattern in one direction and is a little more specific as to what it picks up. With a condenser, you've got everything from cardioid, which is this setting here, to figure 8, which means it picks up equally from the front and the back of the microphone, or all the way to the left. That full circle indicates omnidirectional, which means it picks up in all directions. So those can be useful in different scenarios, and we're not going to get into that today, but maybe that's the subject of another video. But that's a condenser microphone. This is a large diaphragm. This is a small diaphragm. You use these for just about everything. Most of the time for vocals, you're going to use a large diaphragm condenser mic. Sometimes a dynamic sounds better. On my album, I used a combination. Depending on the song, one sounded better over the other. Small diaphragms are usually used for instruments. They make great overheads, great on acoustic guitar. They tend to pick up a little more detail and be a little flatter than the large diaphragm. And it's just all about just a different type of sound. So if you have a chance to get your hands on both, it'd be fun to A/B those and listen to the differences between the two. Okay, the third type of microphone is the ribbon. And this is probably the most popular ribbon microphone out there, the Royer R122. And the way a ribbon microphone works is very similar to the way a dynamic microphone works. Although instead of a moving coil and a magnet, there's actually inside this area here, where all these little slits are, is a piece of it's probably something like aluminum. It's a very, very thin piece of metal that's corrugated, so it's got these little grooves in it. And they string it out from here to here, and so it's pulled fairly tightly, and it's a very, very thin piece of metal. And that is actually what produces the electricity. So when you sing into this or play a guitar into it, that ribbon, the entire ribbon moves, and that gets converted to electricity, which becomes the signal. Ribbon microphones typically can handle really high volumes, which is why these are great. You'll usually see this on like a guitar cabinet, a bass cabinet, maybe not a bass cabinet, but a guitar cabinet, things like that. And they just have a smooth response. They tend to, of the three microphone types we've talked about, ribbons tend to be, to my ear, the most natural sounding, but a lot of times they can be boomy in the low end, but they have a nice soft high end to them. So I've used them on acoustic guitar quite a bit, electric guitar amps, sometimes on vocals. But there's not a ton of ribbon mics out there. Obviously, this one's really expensive. There are some cheaper options, but they're just not very easy to make on a budget. So they're not going to be the cheapest option that you find. But they're pretty cool, and you can find a lot of samples out there on the internet of them at use. But those are the three microphones. So we've got condenser, well, I guess dynamic, condenser, and ribbon. So next time you're in the studio or thinking about getting a new microphone, think about what your needs are. Do you need more detail? Maybe a condenser's right for you. Do you have a couple condensers and you want a different sound? Maybe a dynamic or a ribbon would make sense to give you a different tone for your microphone palette. So that's it for me. Thanks for checking in on this. Hopefully that answered a few questions for you. And again, I'm Joe from HomeStudioCorner.com, and we'll see you again soon.